Alright, so in this exercise what we have is we have a list of zeros and ones, and what we want to do is we sort of start at the beginning and we can always jump ahead either one space or two spaces, but we're not allowed to land on ones. We can only land on zeros, so we could jump ahead. So here we can't go ahead one space because that would get us to a 1, so we have to go ahead two spaces to this 0. Then from here we could jump ahead one space, or we could jump ahead two spaces. And then let's say we jump ahead two spaces, then we have to jump ahead another two spaces, and then we're at the end. So what we need to do is, given a list of zeros and ones, we need to get the minimum number of jumps required to get to the end. So now this says the minimum number of jumps. So that's really important, because what that means is that we can't just choose any strategy. We have to come up with the best strategy beforehand. And then once we've come up with this optimal strategy, then we implement it. So now when we think about it, this is, it's designed so that you're always able to complete this. So you're never going to have two ones in a row. And so basically the optimal strategy here is that if you can jump two spaces ahead, do it. Otherwise, if you're not able to jump ahead two spaces, then you have to be able to jump ahead one space. And so you do that instead. And so with this, because you're jumping ahead two spaces whenever possible, this will work. And so that's our logic. And so basically what we need to do is we need to sort of keep track of our index and then keep jumping ahead. And so this is what we're going to do. Getting down to the code here. So going to start, we want to keep track of the number of jumps. So jump count is going to start at 0. And we want to keep track of where we are in the list. Or in the string. Yeah, in the list. So I'm going to start at 0 because the first entry in a list is index is 0 because Python. Okay, so we're going to execute our jumping strategy. So what we're going to do is so the index is going to start at 0, and we know we're done when we've reached the end of the list. So let's see here. So while index is less than the length of C, what we're going to do is we're going to take jump count. So we always increase our jump. So whenever we make our next move, we automatically increase our jump count by 1. And then what we need to do is we need to figure out where we landed. Were we able to go two spaces ahead or one? So so we look two spaces ahead and see if that is a 0. And if it is a 0, then we can jump there. And so we'll take our index and increase by 2. Otherwise, it has to be the case that the next index is 0. And so index is going to be index plus 1. Now, there's something that is an issue here. Because we need to check two spaces ahead. But we need to make sure that we're not at the end of the... we have to make sure we're not at the very end of the string, because otherwise, like if index is equal to the length of C, then you can't go two indices ahead. You'll get an error. So we can only do this for so long. So we'll take it and we'll subtract 2. And the reason that we subtract 2 and not 1 is a weird thing with how, so the length of C is, so the index of the final entry of C is equal to the length of C minus 1 because of the way that Python counts things. So that's why we have to subtract 2 here. Normally, if you're just coding this on the fly and you didn't have that like right, you didn't have that correct off the top of your head, much like I didn't have that correct off the top of my head when I first wrote this up, you can just start with like -1 and then test the code, and if it gives you an error, test -2 and it will work. But anyways, so now this will get us almost to the end. So if we think about this, what are the possible outcomes here? Either we were at, so let's say we got up to the length of C -2. Basically, either we were able to get to the end, or we were just one shy of getting to the end and had to stop the loop because we weren't able to look 2 spaces ahead. Because if you think about it, if you're at the second to last entry, you can look 1 space ahead, but you can't look 2 spaces ahead. And that's why that's the possible issue here. So, if it is the case that there is still 1 index left, then we need to make the additional jump to the very end. So jump once more if the end has not yet been reached. So, now how do we know if the end has not yet been reached? If the end has not yet been reached, then the index is going to be equal to the length of C -2. Because if we were at the very end, the index would be length of C -1. And since we're not at the end, we have to be just 1 shy of it. Okay, so in this case, then we need to increase the index once more to get us to the very end. So at this point, it doesn't matter. We don't need to keep track of index anymore because we know that this last jump is going to get us to the end, but we do need to make sure that we increase our jump count to account for this final jump. All right, and then we return jump count. And so that's our code. And now we test it out. And it seems to work, so we submit it. And there we go. All right, so yeah, the basic thing that we needed to keep in mind here was that at the very beginning, we really needed to sort of stop and think about the optimal strategy before implementing it, because they're looking for the minimum number of steps, you need to have the optimal strategy. And then once we came up with it, we just implement it. And the only sort of tricky part was figuring out how to deal with the very end. And maybe there are like fancier or like more elegant ways to deal with it, but this way works, and it's only a couple lines of code. So even if you could improve it, you probably can't improve it. You probably cannot improve it by very much. But yeah, and then of course you need to sort of be comfortable with sort of the nuances with indexes or indices, whatever, with Python. And of course, if you were to get tripped up at all with that while coding this, you could just sort of like maybe like print, like I think what I did when I was troubleshooting is I would actually print out index in the while loop so that I could look at some of the examples that they have and see like, okay, so where did this stop, or where did I run into an issue? But yeah, once you figure out how to deal with the end, that's really the only other main intricacy with this problem, and so that's how you solve this exercise.